Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, the COVID 19 pandemic shows that a health crisis is not just a health crisis. It disrupts societies, economies, and livelihoods. No individual alone can protect themselves from a disease outbreak, and no nation can act alone in a pandemic. We can only confront these shared threats by working together in solidarity, using a One Health approach that addresses the links between humans, animals, and ecosystems. The rollout of vaccines against COVID 19 is giving us all hope of light at the end of the tunnel. But this is a global crisis, and the solutions must be shared equitably as global public goods, not as private commodities that widen inequalities and leave people behind. We're calling on the international community to work together through COVAX to ensure that vaccination of all health workers and other high-risk groups is underway in all countries within the first 100 days of 2021. Vaccines will help to end the pandemic, but they will not fix the vulnerabilities at its roots. There is no vaccine for poverty. There is no vaccine for hunger. There is no vaccine for inequality. 75 years after the birth of the United Nations, the need for national unity and global solidarity has never been more apparent. We must all work together in humility and solidarity so that a pandemic of this magnitude and severity never happens again. COVID 19 is a reminder that for everything that makes us different, we're one humanity. We share the same DNA, the same hopes and dreams, and the same planet. There is no other option but to work together. The stakes have never been higher, but nor has the prize: a healthier, safer, fairer, and more sustainable world for everyone, everywhere. Sabadika, I thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Your Royal Highness, Dr. Tedros, panelists, friends from PMAC who are much more used to face-to-face meetings in more normal times, and all of the people watching through Zoom and Facebook. Sawadee Ka, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you very much for being with us tonight for this armchair discussion, which is really going to kick off the detailed discussions about COVID that's going to occur in the plenary sessions of PMAC over the coming days. And thanks very much to the previous speakers, and especially for Dr. Tedros for his inspiring message. I think he has the hardest job in the world at the moment, being Director General of WHO at a time of a global pandemic. My name is Fran Bam, and I work at Flinders University in Adelaide on the traditional lands of the Ghana people. I'm also co-chair of the People's Health Movement, which is a global network of health activists who are working for social justice and health through 80 country circles. And we're very happy to note that we've been a partner for many years with PMAC, and we really value that connection and the chance to engage about global health issues and bring our political economy perspective to bear on all those issues. I have to remind you that we will have a panel discussion. The speakers are going to just speak for 3 minutes each, and we invite you to put those questions in the question and answer box on Zoom. And then we will include those questions as part of the panel discussion. As we've heard, COVID-19 has taken over 2 million lives and taken a huge toll on lives and livelihood. It's disrupted our health systems and had huge impacts beyond health. It's really slowed progress with the Sustainable Development Goals. Our economy is in recession. It's pulling millions back into extreme poverty and exposed social and political issues. And it's worsened pre-existing inequities. These inequities, together with poor governance and inadequate political responses to the pandemic, are really putting people's lives at risk. We can say that COVID has shaken our world upside down and thrown existing problems into sharp relief and created many more. And I don't think there is anyone on our globe whose life has been untouched by this pandemic. But as we know, some lives have been much more affected than others. So the sorts of questions we need to ask is, how do we develop pandemic responses that are fair and do not lead to increasing health inequities? How do I identify the many groups who have suffered most? How do we maintain economic activity in the midst of a pandemic? How do we create and maintain international and multilateral cooperation? How are we going to distribute vaccines fairly and respond when they aren't? How can we examine the political economy of the pandemic and determine who have been the real winners and losers? How can we find the origins of the pandemic in a cooperative and constructive manner? And how can we see COVID-19 in light of the many other challenges that our Earth, planet Earth, and there is only one, faces, which include, of course, climate change, biodiversity loss, and for human populations, rising rates of obesity and NCDs, and increasing wealth and income inequities. So there's many questions, and tonight we're going to hear from 6 global leaders who Dr. Panish has already introduced us to, about their perspective on such issues. And then, as I say, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions to question the panelists. Our first speaker is Richard Horton, who's very well known to the global health community as an outspoken editor of the Lancet who likes to pull punches. He's worked to develop the idea of planetary health, which concerns the health of human civilizations and the ecosystems that we all depend on. And through the Lancet, he has championed the idea that it is not just a pandemic we are facing, but rather a syndemic. And I'm sure he will say something about that. So Richard, over to you to provide a global overview of COVID assessment and an assessment of the good and not so good aspects of COVID's performance.
Thank you very much, Fran. Some of you may have read the book by Giuseppe di Lampedusa called The Leopard. It's a book that's set at a particular moment in the transition of Italian European history in the 19th century, when an old aristocratic order gave way to a newer and very different era. There's a famous line in The Leopard that you may have heard: everything needs to change so that everything can stay the same. And now feels like a similar moment. It's not clear to me, actually, that people in the world today have understood that we're now living in a completely transformed era than we were at the beginning of 2020. And let me try and set out some reasons why. First, we've seen that society is much more brittle than we once thought. Progress, human progress, is not inevitable. Reversal is indeed possible. And that has been a terrifying and unexpected shock for governments, for businesses, for communities. Second, we're passing through an unrivaled period of disruption in our societies. The normative framework that we have lived and worked with and in has been shattered. Geopolitically, the positions of the United States, China, Europe, radically different today than 12 months ago. Economically, developmentally, The Sustainable Development Goals, where do they lie today, a year on into this pandemic? We need a radical reappraisal of where they sit. Third, we have to rethink the meaning of security, homeland security and global health security, integrating global health security into universal health coverage, putting a premium on resilience, thinking about the relation between global health security and climate, environment, biodiversity, perhaps reintroducing the notion of human security once again. Fourth, we now understand that biological threats cannot be understood or addressed without a clearer appreciation of the kind of society in which we live. Ideas of inequality, race, gender have been central to understanding the impact of this coronavirus. The syndemic, as Fran mentioned, the synthesis of epidemics, the biological intersecting with the social. Fifth, the intergenerational injustices that we have seen have been viciously exposed. The connections between education and health, especially mental health, have revealed the true threat to the futures of 1.5 billion children and young people, a threat to those who will be the future stewards of our planet. Sixth, we've witnessed a catastrophic failure of global governance. No international leadership, no international coordination, indeed international division, disunity, and discord. COVID-19 has been weaponized to undermine multilateralism. And when we emerge from this crisis, we will be walking through the ruins of a failed global world order. Seventh, health has now been catapulted to the pinnacle of political priorities. But COVID-19 was and isn't a crisis only about health. It's also a crisis about life itself. It's about our biography as well as our biology, our universal vulnerabilities, our political as well as our physical lives. And finally, we truly have entered a period of what the French writer Raymond Aron called universal history, a unification of humankind with reasons for unequaled solidarity, a truly global health, a truly planetary health. And here there is a unique opportunity. In a paper published just this month, a few days ago, Nobel economist Angus Deaton analyzes the financial impact of the pandemic. COVID-19 has certainly made most countries worse off. Global poverty will have increased, but that's not the whole story. And I'm closing, Fran. The idea that COVID-19 has increased global income inequality, which is a widely held view, is false. That's wrong. Rich countries have suffered more deaths per head than poor countries. Put another way, fewer deaths meant more income. The result is that international income inequality has actually decreased. Countries and peoples have been brought closer together. So, as the world converges, perhaps there is an opportunity to embrace every human being's global identity, every human being's indivisible dignity, and every human being's unique value. And perhaps that is the lasting lesson of this pandemic. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. That was a great, passionate appeal, really, to the world to really take this seriously. And our second speaker is Tom Friedman, who has extensive experience with infectious disease, public health and epidemiology. He's worked in India on TB control. He's been the New York commissioner. He's headed the US CDC and now leads Resolve to Save Lives. And he's going to talk, and you can see how well equipped he is to do this. He's going to address the issue of what have we learnt and how can we take advantage of the pandemic to ensure that we do really strengthen global and national public health systems. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Fran, and it's an honor to be with you, at least virtually. Thanks to all of the organizers of this important conference, and it's an honor also to follow my friend Richard Horton and his passionate and appropriate remarks on how the world has failed and must learn going forward. I thought I would just give three things that have gone well, because it's easy to overlook that. Three things that we must learn and three things that we must do going forward. First, in terms of what's gone well, there has been really wonderful global collaboration in science. And that includes everything from multi-country studies to the crashing down of many paywalls of scientific publication, to the collaboration and learning. Fundamentally, this is about us against the virus. The virus outnumbers us. We have to outsmart it. And we can do that by working together. So first thing that worked well was international collaboration. Second is vaccine development. And I think we have to recognize that this didn't happen in 11 months. This happened in decades of research on vaccine. So we've seen remarkable progress, a stunning new platform with mRNA, encouraging possibilities for progress with the vectored vaccines and the subunit vaccines. So really, in fact, kudos also to Lancet, just came out, estimated 120 million lives will be saved primarily by measles and hepatitis B vaccination among the cohort born from 2000 to 2030. Vaccination is really one of the greatest accomplishments in the world, and it's getting even better. Third is a recognition that we are all connected, that if disease spreads anywhere, it is a potential risk everywhere. And we see this now with the variants. The more uncontrolled spread there is anywhere, the more risk there will be that a variant emerges that can evade our natural or vaccine-induced immunity. So those are positive lessons. Not so positive lessons. First is governance. There's been one analysis that compared countries and put them in three categories: control, consensus, or chaos. There's been way too much chaos, way too little consensus. What we've seen is that public health capacities do make a big difference, and an analysis that my organization has completed documents that. However, good public health can be trumped by bad politics. Second, that science and public health have been sidelined. The parts of the world that supported and followed public health and science did better. Fewer cases, less death, and less economic dislocation. And third, equity has worsened. Pandemics and epidemics and outbreaks are all too often targeted attacks on the poor, the disenfranchised, on minority populations. And this is true within countries and among countries. As my friend Dr. Tedros has said, we face the potential of a moral catastrophe. It is ethically unacceptable that a healthy young person with little chance of dying from COVID get a vaccine in a country which can afford it, while an older person or a healthcare worker in a poorer country doesn't have access to vaccination. And the only real solution to that is going to be to massively ramp up production by any means necessary. And that means recognizing that a product that can save millions of lives is a global good and should not be restricted in its distribution or production. Finally, three things that we can do going forward. It's a rare window of opportunity. It is literally now or never to make the world a much safer and healthier place. First, we need to improve national capacities. Virtually every country needs to address staffing, costs, the information systems, response systems. There are very few countries that came through this well, a few, but not many. And so all of us need to strengthen our own country's systems, especially in lower and middle income countries, which have fewer resources. And that brings me to the second point, which is we need to upgrade our global health architecture. That means we need a stronger WHO as the anchor of activities. We need to increase funding for CEPI, but we also need new financial, technical, and operational supports for lower and middle income countries. There are various means by which that can be done. We cannot waste this moment arguing about how to do it. We need to figure out the pros and cons of different ways forward and then move. 2021 has to be the year in which we end the long cycle of panic and neglect and ensure that we are protecting people around the world. And finally, third, to end, we need a stronger primary healthcare system. Thailand is a model. In fact, Thailand has excellent primary care, but for lower and middle income countries, you can almost count on the fingers of one hand the number of countries that can say the same thing. And even in countries like the US, there is a tremendous underinvestment and under support of primary care. Without primary care, we won't have early detection. We won't have effective vaccination. We won't have effective care of the chronic conditions which reduce the resilience of individuals and communities to infectious disease threats. And if we do these three things, stronger public health systems at the national and global level, and stronger primary care systems around the world, then really we will not have wasted this crisis. We will not have wasted this opportunity to make the world a much healthier and much safer place. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. I think it will be music to the ears of everyone in PHM to hear your appeal for much stronger primary health care and your point that good public health can be trumped by bad politics and that we are facing a moral catastrophe, but we can do something about it. So thank you very much. Now, next we're going to hear from Thailand, our host country of PMAC, who have been one of the places that really has done something about COVID. The Thai Minister of Public Health isn't able to join us today, but he has provided a 3-minute recording. His name is Anurit Chan Riat-Woon, and we're going to watch that, and then Supakit Siralak will join the discussion of the panel. So let's hear from the Minister of Public Health.
Your Royal Highness, honorable panelists and moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Thailand is the first country to detect COVID-19 case outside of China. Until now, we have been battling with 2 waves of COVID and learned several lessons. The World Health Organization has concluded our 3 most important strengths. First is the decisive leadership that listens to both the best scientific evidence available and the social reactions. Second is our strong public health system and universal health coverage that based on many decades of continuous investment and dedicated spirit of our health workers. Third is the whole of society approach, which demonstrates the solidarity of everyone in Thailand to practice social distancing, hand hygiene, and wearing face masks. The review also suggested us to improve the information systems, to expand the capacity of our outbreak investigation teams, and to foster the extensive use of digital technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, the emergence of the second wave in Thailand links closely to migrant workers. This confirms that no one is safe until everyone is safe. We join the world to ensure that COVID vaccines are developed, produced, and distributed fairly as global public goods. Thailand confirms our goal of COVID vaccine for everyone, regardless of their income or social status. This is the universal health coverage in real action. COVID-19 shows us our strengths and weaknesses. Let us seize the opportunity to realize the great benefits from investing in our health systems and health security in preparedness for future public health emergencies. We must stand in solidarity to overcome COVID-19 and to minimize its health, social, and economic impacts. If you require any more details, Dr. Supakit Siralak, the Director General of Department of Medical Sciences, will stand by to answer your questions. Thank you. สวัสดีครับ
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Dr. Chan Riat-Woon, and especially for reminding us that no one is safe unless everyone is safe, and the importance of universal healthcare. Our next speaker is Dr. Margaret Chan, who I think will be well known to all of you from her former role as Director General of WHO and her work in WHO. She's currently founding dean at Tsinghua University in China, and she's also been Director of Health in Hong Kong, and in fact was the first woman to hold that position. So she's so well placed to provide her insights on the importance of leadership and partnerships during pandemics. Thank you, Dr. Chan.
Hi, let me thank you, moderator, Professor Baum, Your Royal Highness, Dr. Tedros, Director General of the World Health Organization. I thank the organizers for this invitation to this very important PMAC conference. Well, the advantage of speaking after Richard and Tom Frieden is that most of the things that I want to say have been covered. So I need to improvise a bit, okay? Now, let me begin by saying that throughout my public health career in Hong Kong and later in WHO, I have been involved with several new and re-emerging diseases like H5N1, avian influenza, SARS, H1N1 influenza pandemic, MERS, and Ebola. Without exception, these outbreaks were brought under control with leadership and partnership at national, regional, and global levels. So this is reinforcing the importance of leadership and partnership. Sadly, in the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has failed. The world has failed to come together in solidarity, to cooperate, to protect people. The 1-year-long COVID-19 pandemic is still raging around the world. 2 days ago, the world surged past 100 million cases and more than 2 million deaths. And of course, these are the direct health impacts. It has also aggravated other health problems and inequalities, especially in women and the poor. Like Tom Frieden, in the midst of this health crisis, we have some heartwarming heroes leading the fight against the pandemic. And of course, the healthcare workers, the first responders worldwide. We thank them for their professionalism, their sacrifice, and dedication to serving the sick under very trying conditions. In addition, as Tom Frieden mentioned, we should be thankful for the unprecedented cooperation in the scientific community in sharing information, experience, and medical supplies, especially in research and development for diagnostic, therapeutics, and vaccine. And of course, we must not forget the courage and the empathy shown by many communities in the world to all these responders, to our healthcare workers. Their passion and also their courage and empathy are much needed and appreciated. Vaccines are undoubtedly our best hope for the world. It has, I hope, it will help us to bring COVID-19 under control. But vaccines are in short supply. Equitable vaccine distribution, especially to developing countries through COVAX and Gavi, could be consequential to the overall global fight against the pandemic. And I'm sure Seth Berkley will say more about that. The pandemic won't be controlled until it is controlled everywhere. Therefore, we call upon world leaders to choose solidarity and cooperation to ensure equitable distribution of vaccines based on science and to bring this pandemic under control. The COVID-19 pandemic is a sobering wake-up call. Mind you, the World Health Organization has issued many such warning calls before, and I hope that it would mean the world's leaders would take lead and take heed of this biggest and loudest alarm clock. We need, as I put it in the second report of the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, in short, the IPPR. The world's partners need to come together and work together with a renewed resolve to make the world more prepared, more secure, more just, more equitable, and more resilient to the challenges of the future, which will surely include more pandemic threats. And let me end there, and I thank you.
That's fantastic, Dr. Chan. Thanks again for just impressing how important it is that we have equal distribution of the vaccine. That's such an important message. And I'm sure that is going to be one of the themes of our next speaker, Dr. Seth Barkley, who's CEO of the Gavi Vaccine Alliance. He's currently co-leading the vaccines pillar for access to COVID-19 tools accelerator, and previously he founded the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative and worked at the Rockefeller Foundation and at the CDC. And so he's very well placed to be speaking to us about the issues that we're going to face in rolling out the vaccine globally and how COVAX has the potential to assure global equitable access. So over to you, Seth.
Thank you, Fran. Your Royal Highness, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted to be with you in this important meeting. Almost exactly a year ago, when this pandemic was just beginning to unfold, when the world was just waking up to how far the coronavirus had already spread, and later when the WHO declared COVID a global health emergency, the prospect of a vaccine seemed very distant. Today, the world has not one, but a handful of safe and efficacious vaccines approved for emergency use. And in February, people in the world's poorest countries will begin to receive their first shipments. For this to have happened within a matter of weeks after the first vaccines were made available in the wealthiest countries is unprecedented. Getting this far so quickly involved overcoming huge challenges in the scientific development, manufacture, and regulation of these new vaccines. But with nearly 100 million people infected and many countries now experiencing fresh surge in cases, including highly transmissible new variants, the pandemic is far from over. Even as more COVID-19 vaccines are approved and begin to be rolled out, competition is extremely high, and vaccine nationalism threatens to prolong the pandemic. This is why it is so important to ensure that rapid, fair, and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines remains the global priority. Because unless people in all nations are protected, the virus will continue to circulate, and the opportunity to resume any source of normal life, business, trade, and travel, and any hopes of rebooting the global economy will continue to evade us all. This can only be avoided if COVID-19 vaccines are made available to people who are at high risk in all countries. The IMF estimates that faster global access to COVID-19 vaccines will raise global income by $9 trillion over the next 5 years. The only way to achieve that is through COVAX. With more than 190 countries now involved and collectively representing more than 90% of the global population, COVAX is the only truly global solution. It supports the research, development, manufacturing, and distribution of a diverse portfolio of COVID-19 vaccine candidates and negotiates their pricing, and therefore is the best way to get these vaccines out and try to end this pandemic as quickly as possible. With 2.2 billion initial doses secured for 2021, more than 1.3 billion of these will go to people living in the 92 low and lower middle income countries, and for those in humanitarian situations, which will be paid through by the Gavi COVAX Advanced Market Commitment. That's enough to protect about 27% of their populations, including all of the high-risk individuals such as frontline healthcare workers, vulnerable people, and more. Realizing this is obviously going to involve huge logistical, regulatory, technical, and personnel challenges in getting countries prepared for what will essentially be the world's largest and most rapid vaccine deployment in history. And as we've seen, changes in the virus is affecting virus transmission as well as vaccine efficacy, which again needs global cooperation to resolve. But now, as we are poised to begin this task, During this early stage, when demand outstrips supply, vaccine nationalism threatens it all. When governments pursue bilateral deals with manufacturers, it not only places additional constraints on what already limited global supplies, but it contributes to a bidding war that could put these vaccines further out of reach of many of the people that need to be protected the most. If governments continue this, and if vaccine manufacturers only offer COVID-19 vaccines to the highest bidders, then even if doses are promised to the rest of the world further down the line, this will only prolong the crisis, because delaying the availability of doses to COVAX will allow the virus to continue to circulate, mutate, and adapt better to the human host, and therefore continue to threaten all countries. This works against everybody's best interests, for we are only safe if we are all safe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Seth. That was really good. I mean, really impressing on us what's at stake if we don't get fair distribution. And it's not just health effects, it's social and economic effects. And that leads on very nicely to our final speaker, who is Jayati Ghosh, who's a professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts in the US. And she's going to give us a social and economic perspective on the impact of COVID. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's really a great privilege to be in this amazing panel, and I think I've already learned a lot. So I do feel very privileged to be part of this. I'm going to take up just first of all the issue of vaccines, and I think the point has already been made that we definitely need much greater global solidarity. But I want to highlight not just the distribution, but the production of vaccines. And what we do know now is that the production is deeply controlled by the fact of intellectual property rights, by patent laws that actually allow companies to have monopolies over their product. When we do have available the possibility of compulsory licensing, that would force all the companies that have developed approved vaccines to make available their technology to as many other producers as possible with a certain reasonable royalty. The possibility for this exists. The WTO's agreement on TRIPS and public health specifies that this can be done in emergencies like the pandemic is today. And yet the rich country governments are opposing this in the WTO and are preventing the suspension of intellectual property rights at a moment when it is really, I believe, inexcusable. So I think that must be one of the first elements of international solidarity. We need to dramatically upscale the production of vaccines, which can be done if we suspend the intellectual property rights. And it is really just immediately possible if we do it right now. I just want to also mention a few other aspects of what I think the pandemic has taught us, particularly for developing countries. And here I want to disagree a little bit with Professor Angus Deaton in the recent article that it has reduced global inequality. That is only if you look at the incidence of COVID-19. In every other way, this pandemic has increased global inequality, whether in terms of the fiscal response, the hit on employment and livelihoods, the impact on people's nutrition, the impact on treatment of other diseases, because public health systems across the world have more or less been suspended for critical things like inoculations for children, reproductive health and other diseases, treatment of cancer, tuberculosis, and so on. So I think there is massive global inequality, which has increased or been exposed by this pandemic. And what can we do then to do something about this? And which are the areas we have to look at? I think the underinvestment in health was mentioned, and we absolutely need much more investment in health, particularly in the developing countries, and particularly not just in infrastructure, but in personnel, because we also lose significant numbers of personnel to the rich world. They don't just grab the vaccines, they also grab our health workers, the more skilled and semi-skilled workers as well. We need much greater complementarity between public and private health providers. We've seen that in many developing countries, because of a significant privatization of health services or because of the inadequacy of public health systems, people who are forced to go to private health systems that are unregulated face severe problems, and the public health system simply cannot manage, and there isn't adequate coordination. We need strategies to ring fence other health issues. I mentioned vaccination, reproductive health, but we find that in many developing countries, basic other treatments are being postponed, delayed, and in some cases denied. We need to actually have health stress tests because just like we have financial sector stress tests, we now know that this is just one of many possible things that can happen in future. We need to subject our public health systems to stress testing that will make us aware of where our weaknesses are and how we can actually change those. And finally, I want to emphasize the link between health and nutrition. At this distinguished gathering, I mean, everyone in the panel is fully aware of all of this. But this is a very serious problem. Our global food systems are broken. They are unhealthy, they are unsustainable ecologically, and they are unequal. We need to actually dramatically alter the way in which we conceive of our global health systems, how we encourage different countries to provide food security and to provide nutritious food to all, how to prevent malnutrition of both kinds, the kinds that lead to obesity and ill health, as well as of undernutrition. And I think this is a very, very important thing that is going to become even more serious in future as climate change begins to ravage our other aspects of food supply as well. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jayati. It's a great reminder of some of the human rights issues that are being raised. So now we're going to discussion, and I see some questions have been flowing in. I thought I'd ask by asking Superkit Cyrilak first a question about, and this is based on one of the questions that came in, about the importance of universality and whether that covers the whole population or are there some people who are excluded from that? And that's based on one of the questions. So go ahead.
Thank you, Fran, and good evening from Bangkok. To answer this question, I would like to say that the second wave of epidemic in Thailand now, most of the case came from the migrant worker, as you know, in the news. And normally, when we talk about universal health coverage in Thailand, that we already have implemented for over 15 years, the intention is that not just only Thai people or Thai nationality. We would like to cover all the people living in Thai soil, but by the law, it still have the limitation to do that. But during the outbreak, we guarantee that no matter you are any nationality living in Thailand, we will do the testing, treat you, and also take all the control. Even now, we try to studying how to provide the vaccine in this group of people also. So this confirms that Royal Thai government try to implement what we call the universal coverage, cover all the people in Thailand, especially for the vulnerable group of migrant people in Thailand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to go to Tom to sort of continue this theme of the sort of health systems we need. And we just know that in your country, Tom, you've just got a new president. What steps would you like to see him taking in the next 6 months towards a stronger US public health system?
Well, I think there are fundamentally three things we need to do, and not just in the US, but globally. The first, obviously, is to control COVID. And it's been really encouraging to see the remarkably fast start of the Biden administration. They have organization, a basis on science, and effective communication. Those are three essential components of a response which have been sorely lacking for a year. So the first has to be to get a much better handle on COVID. It's way out of control in this country. And we're going to have to double down on protection protocols while we ramp up vaccination. And then even when vaccination is widespread, we're going to have to get much better at testing, isolation, contact tracing, and quarantine to reduce the likelihood that there will be breakthrough with evasive mutants that are able to get around natural or vaccine-induced immunity. But that really should just be the beginning of a public health renaissance. And that's going to involve strengthening information systems, funding, staffing, and coordination in the US, and not just for infectious diseases, but for public health more generally. President Biden has the opportunity not just to turn the tide on COVID, but to become the public health president. And he would be able to do that by implementing programs that are within reach, but not yet done. And those include programs to control tobacco use, which remains a huge problem in the US. No country in the world has yet regulated nicotine out of tobacco to bring it down to non-addictive levels. And yet, in 2009, the US Congress passed a law that gives the US Food and Drug Administration the authority to do that. Yeah. The first country in the world to do that will deserve tremendous credit. Tobacco remains the world's leading killer. Unless we take urgent action, 1 billion people, 1 billion people will be killed by tobacco in this century. There's also important action to be taken on sodium reduction, which has been stalled for not one decade, but multiple decades. So first, strengthen public health in the US. Second, strengthen primary care. The US system is sorely lacking in effective primary care. And I have to confess to a program that we tried and that failed. We ran a program in the US when I was CDC director called Million Hearts. The idea is that we could prevent 1 million heart attacks and strokes over a 5-year period. Well, the data are in. We only got 1/7, 15% of the way to that target. We failed. And if you look at the components of that target, the 3 main things we wanted to do were eliminate trans fat, and that was delayed for political reasons for many, many years. So it's just coming into effect now, could have been done years ago. Globally, WHO has called for the global elimination of trans fat by 2023. And Thailand, again, is a leader here. Thailand quickly did this. In just 6 months, it accomplished trans fat elimination very successfully. Every country can and should do that. Second was sodium reduction. This is really difficult, and we need to look at how to reduce sodium. It's clear that excess sodium kills an estimated 3 million people a year, and reduction is possible, but it's quite difficult. And figuring out how to do that with fiscal levers, figuring out how to do that with targets, or Chile's best practice of front of package warnings. Look, frankly, traffic lights aren't going to help people much, but warnings, a stop sign really does help because it forces the companies to change. And then first is strengthen public health in the US. Second is strengthen primary care. And the third is engage globally, because we are all in this together. It's not going to be a north-south issue. It's a world issue that we need to ensure that we have a much better way of finding, stopping, and preventing health threats. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I mean, although, of course, it is a north-south issue, the north is doing a lot better probably than the south. Richard, I wanted to come to one of the points that you made, and it's also reflected in a question that Jesse Bump has posted. And you talked about international disunity in a failed global order. And he really makes the point that with COVID, we've been unable to overcome basic elements such as unresolved IPR, questions around vaccine, and the manipulation and weakening of WHO by member states, such as by compromising its budget and limiting its authority to investigate national data. So do you think that we can get to international unity and a working global health order, or are you totally pessimistic about that?
No, I'm not pessimistic. I think that we have now an American administration that can play an exceptionally important and constructive role in facilitating a strong multilateral dialogue. You know, it's very easy to be critical of the US, but when the US goes AWOL, we realize that actually in global health, as in many other dimensions of global governance, we actually need a strong US presence. And I think that's one of the lessons of the past 4 years. We need to welcome the US back into the global community and encourage their participation. This issue about how we promote stronger global governance, I mean, this is searching for the Holy Grail. And how many meetings, Fran, have we been to where we've talked about this? I think it's I don't believe that we will ever find the perfect system of global governance. But I do believe that we can, within countries, more importantly, identify policies to build greater solidarity. Because there's another type of transmission which undermines solidarity within nation states. And that transmission is the transmission of intergenerational inequality. And if we could address intergenerational inequality, then I think we could make a huge impact. And this is what Michael Marmot talks about. It's not building back better, it's building back fairer. And that means addressing child poverty, investing in early years settings, supporting minimum wage, getting young people into training and education for employment. That, I think, if we can promote social mobility, that is one of the pathways to greater solidarity within our communities, within our societies, within our nation states, and that can then build out globally.
And I've called that myself. We need a social vaccine as well as a biomedical.
Exactly.
There are things you can do to stop poverty.
Exactly.
Thanks, Richard. Margaret, I'd love to come to you now on this question of whether we can establish a more effective global health order. What would you like to see happen in the next year to reassert that kind of sort of world and get much more international unity?
Well, based on my more than 10 years experience working in WHO, I tend to agree with what Richard says. Getting global governance, it means you need to have a supranational authority when things happen, when things are not going well. And I have to be frank with you, I don't think the countries of this world is ready for that. So we should not, well, while we do not give that up, but we need to start at the country level and see whether or not national governance can be a good starting point. Building, community support, rebuilding trust, making sure that leaders keep their promises and not to overpromise and underperform. That is my common experience when I was working in the United Nations. I mean, rhetoric is cheap. Rhetoric is cheap. Words do not worth much. We need action. We need action in investing in people. I used to say, remember the people. So don't forget people. That is the role of political leaders. They far too often, they broke the social contract with people, with the community. So I hope that is something we can address.
Lovely.
Now, while I have the floor, Franz, I think it is important. I said that in 2003, when I left Hong Kong for the WHO, I said, we need to maintain ecosystem balance and being in harmony with nature, with animals, and with plants. And I dare say it is high time we reinvigorate the One Health global health mechanism that was started, some years ago, and to look at this triangulation and see what we can do.
Okay, thank you. And I know that PMAC had a very good conference on One Health. I think maybe it was 4 years ago, I'm not sure. Now we're running out of time. I have been allowed to have an extra couple of minutes because I do want to ask Seth and then Jayati a question. And Seth, I wanted you just to talk to that question. I know one of the things our People's Health Movement is doing is wanting to back South Australia and India's call for a waiver of the TRIPS agreement under WHO. And I see that you'd like to say something about that issue. So please.
So thank you, Fran. And I do think IP rights play a really important role in drugs and in diagnostics and others. But there is a naivete on vaccines to say if we just could, have the IP given away, that's going to lead to scale up of vaccines. And that is just not true. I mean, we've managed to take the 11 WHO vaccines and have made them available to the world at less than 5% of the cost in wealthy countries. We've done that by going from 5 to 17 companies, initially companies that were in the West and wealthy, eventually tech transfers to companies in the developing world. And if you look at what's happened now with the vaccines that are there, we've already done a large number of tech transfers. The issue is IP can easily be worked around. These are living things. These are biologics. What you can't work around is know-how, is the thousands of pages of assays, quality assurance, quality control, the regulatory documents. So if you want vaccines to be made quickly, you got to have cooperation. The company's got to say, here's all of our trade secrets, and you can just submit those to the regulators. And while we've been speaking, yet another vaccine has announced its efficacy results, shown the difference between the results in wealthy countries and developing countries. That vaccine also has tech transfers now to many other companies. So that work is really critical. And so we have to make sure that we bring all the companies to the table, not just developed countries, but developing countries. And of course, we have to build more capacity and have to make sure there's more vaccine producers going forward. But I just think that the intellectual property is only a small part of what is necessary to make that happen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, to finish the panel discussion, I'm going to go to Jayati, and there have been some questions about this. And you mentioned about Angus Deaton's paper claiming that income levels have got more equal. But can you expand a bit on how you see the inequality has been exacerbated by the pandemic?
Yes, certainly. But can I also just come back a little bit on what Seth Berkley just said? I completely agree that there's much more to the dissemination of and distribution of vaccines than simply the intellectual property rights. But we also have to remember that all of the vaccine candidates that have currently approved were largely done with public funding, prior public research, and some of them entirely with public funding. And therefore, the public must get something back. These companies cannot turn around and say, we're going to charge South Africa 3 times what we have charged some other country in the European Union, that we are not going to make available the knowledge that provides this vaccine to other producers with the appropriate controls and regulations and so on. So I think there is a real issue of not just equity, but of being sensible. The sooner you can vaccinate everybody in the world, the better off everybody in the world will be. So just on that point. On inequalities, so, it is absolutely true, for reasons that I certainly don't understand, that this disease is disproportionately affecting people in North America and Europe and certain other developing countries, and that death rates are much higher. And I don't understand this, but it is clearly the case. But there are many other inequalities that have come about because of not just the pandemic, but the response to the pandemic. The lockdowns created massive economic disruption and loss of livelihood in countries where 90% of the workers are informal, like my own India, and where you had no social protection, where you had people actually reduced to starvation, where all kinds of other public health issues were ignored or delayed, and where many other inequalities got exaggerated. So I think looking at purely the illness is perhaps the wrong way to look at the impact on inequality. And the fact of an illness certainly constrains economic activity. The longer you have it, the longer you have to contend with it, the slower your recovery will be, the less employment will revive, all of that will happen. But it is also the nature of the response. Advanced countries have spent anywhere between 5 to 25% of GDP, fiscal response. Developing countries, on average, 4%. And in some countries, not even 1% of GDP. There is a massive inequality just in terms of how governments have responded, which affects the lives of people and the health of people.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. That was a really impassioned explanation of growing inequities. So I'm afraid that's the end of our panel discussion. We have run out of time. And I think we've had a great session. We've heard from global leaders about their perspectives on COVID, its impact, and how the world might recover. And I think what they've shown is that we are at a global turning point where we can opt to go along a path which promises more of the same, more inequities, more pandemics, more destruction of natural ecology, more declining trust in our governance structures, and failed global cooperation, and of course, more death from NCDs. But we do have an opportunity to do things differently and determine how health and wealth can be more equally distributed, how we can maximize solidarity and include people in the decisions that affect their life, provide people with secure and safe work, ensure people with disabilities have their needs met, and work to solve the crisis of migration and refugees, and respond to the COVID recession by investing in multiple ways to restore and protect natural environments, its biodiversity, and decarbonize the world. And I know which of those two I'd rather live in. And I hope the panel has convinced you that a just, fair, sustainable world is really worth fighting for. So I would normally call on the audience to give you a big clap here, but we can't really do that. But we're certainly thanking all of you very much for your time, for your consideration. So I think that will be a fantastic session. So good night, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see you at more sessions over the weekend. Goodbye.